So, you see that guy?
I love you guys. All right, today we're reviewing the Fellow Aiden, probably one of the coolest pieces of tech I've seen in coffee this year. Now, it's just kind of this black box looking thing, and it'll make you a nice big pot of coffee, or it can do a single cup pour over for you. This unit was sent to me by Fellow shortly after it launched. It costs 365 bucks. Now, what Fellow has tried to do with this thing is make a coffee maker that will give you a totally brainless and delicious pot of coffee, but it also gives you the option to have a full-on nerd out pour over experience if you want to go in that direction. Now, is this the perfect coffee maker? The answer is no. There are some drawbacks that are going to come alongside it. It is pretty cool though. As far as brew quality and coffee quality goes though, really good flavor, balanced, consistent, excellent. But before we get into some of the nitty gritty on it, I need a cup of coffee. Now I have a coffee here roasted by Hatch Coffee Roasters near me. It's grown on a farm called El Viviso. That's in Colombia. Excellent farm. This is a pink bourbon, so I'm just gonna grind up my dose. All right, a little bit of movie magic there. I'm getting the aroma from that already. So I'm just gonna brew 1 cup here. So what I'm actually gonna do, I'm gonna take out this honkin' carafe and I'm gonna put in my little tiny little carafe. You don't have to do that, but I just kind of like seeing and smelling it. And then I'll put in the filter, just like so. Then I'm gonna click the knob here. I'm gonna go into guided brew and I'm gonna select Justin V60. It's gonna ask me how big of a cup I want. So I'm just gonna do like a standard pour over cup, and it's gonna tell me that I need to put in 16 grams of coffee, which I have ready to go right here. We're gonna dump that in. We are going to close the lid and we're gonna click the button and it's gonna start to brew. No hesitation, it'll start right away. Now, in addition to all the cool tech in here that we're gonna talk about, you can go into the chapter list if you wanna check out what we got going on there. This coffee maker actually comes with 2 basket inserts. One smaller one that's wedge shaped for more single serve pour over type style, and then a larger one for batch brews, like big pots of coffee. Not only that though, it's actually got a little switch inside the shower head up here that will allow you to change between single serve and batch brew, and it will actually adjust the water dispersion pattern to better suit each of those brewing styles. More on that in a bit. Now, this batch basket requires you to use this big carafe with it, and that's because there is a little valve on the underside of the nozzle that the carafe slides up under and opens so that it can actually drain. Now, there's also a little sensor, I'm assuming in the bottom of the carafe there, that will prevent you from starting a brew when it's on batch without that carafe installed. Very cool. When you use the single serve basket, you can see there's no valve, it'll just drain right into there, so you can kind of put whatever you want under here, like a cup or a carafe. You can use the big carafe if you want to, but you don't have to. The downside is, because there's no spring-loaded valve there, if you forget to put something there, it will unfortunately just start draining right onto your platform here. The water reservoir is on the side here at 1.5 liters. The power cable comes out the back, and this is a nice little feature. There's a spot underneath where you can coil up any extra if you need to do that. Everything about this brewer is very plasticky, and not like a nice plasticky. Overall, I would say maybe not totally the level of build quality that I would normally expect from Fellow. We will come back to that. And now, good timing, my coffee is done. So let's see how it tastes. Wow, and this is just such a very distinctive coffee. Lots of like floral and kind of these very interesting flavor notes. You know, you'll hear people use this weird word bergamot or bergamot. Bergamot. Depending on where you are to describe this specific note in coffee. It's also found in Earl Grey tea or Fruit Loops, and I'm getting that strongly off of this coffee. Now, if you're here and you landed on this video and you're not like a coffee crazy pour over person like I am. You just saw this coffee maker online. You thought, hey, that looks cool. I need a new coffee maker. Can this just make me a great big old pot of coffee? The answer is absolutely yes. And if that's you, the one thing that I would say is if you're not already doing this, start fresh grinding your coffee using a nice burr grinder. That'll really go a long way to improving your coffee experience. Now, if you are a crazy nerdy pour over person, we're gonna have some fun in a minute here. First though, let's talk about the menu. Firstly, I love that every feature of this machine is accessible on the machine itself. You don't need to use an app to get at every single feature that is hiding out in here. Fortunately, there's also an app where you can access some of those kind of more pain in the neck features that are really kind of tough to adjust on here. They're very easy to adjust in the app, so we're gonna come back to that one. Let's look at some of the easier to access stuff though. When you click the knob, the first thing that comes up is you have an option to do either guided brew or instant brew. Now, if you press instant brew, it's just going to start brewing a standard profile right away. And you can change what that is. We'll come back to that in a sec. Under guided brew, the first thing that'll come up is whatever the last thing that you brewed on here. If you scroll through the menu from the top down, the first thing that you'll see though is a light, medium, and dark roast profile that's preloaded in here by Fellow, as well as a cold brew profile. That's a really cool feature we're gonna come back to. Then you go down from there and something called Fellow Drops comes up. And when you click into that, you see all these kind of names of these fancy coffees. Now, this is really cool. Fellow Drops is like almost like this coffee subscription service that Fellow has. You subscribe to it on your phone and they will curate and make available these very nice coffees to you. You just click on them and then you can order them. What's really cool is any Fellow Aiden, as long as it's connected to Wi-Fi, will pull up recipes for recent Fellow Drops coffees that have been specifically designed by the Fellow team for each one of those coffees. So if you're a Fellow Drops user, you get a Fellow Drops coffee, there will already be a recipe in your machine that is fine-tuned for that specifically. Really cool. As long as you live in the US. Where I am here in Canada, I can't get Fellow Drops. To go back from any menu, you just roll the dial back until you're back at the top of the menu and then you click the back button. Now, when you go down from Fellow Drops, you will see any custom profile that you have put in there yourself. Going back to the main menu, you go down one setting and there's an option to edit any of your profiles. Take my advice, don't do that on here. The experience of doing that on this little tiny screen with this turn knob, it's lacking a little. Just one example. Imagine trying to name a profile using a scroll wheel and push button. Yeah, it's really bad. We will come back to the app, which is much better. Going down one setting, you have the scheduler, so you can set a different schedule for each day and assign a specific profile to each schedule. When you have a schedule loaded in and it's showing you the clock, if everything is good and ready to go, it will give you a little scheduler icon in blue. And if something isn't right, either you got the wrong basket in or the craft's not in, whatever, then it will display red. Then you go down one more and you're into settings. You have chime, clock settings, and units. Now, if you're a coffee geek, I'm gonna suggest you use metric units and turn precise units on. That's gonna give you the experience that's the most analogous to you if you're coming from pour over world. However, if you just want simple and brainless batch brew, you can leave it on imperial and do cups and tablespoons, and that's fine too. Now, if you're a coffee geek in North America, you may feel like I may want to mix imperial and metric units. You know, do your water and coffee weight in grams and mils and your temperature in Fahrenheit, and you just can't do that. It's kind of one or the other, so you do adjust to that. Beyond that, you have your instant brew settings, so you can change your instant brew profile. And then after that, you have connectivity, maintenance, language, and elevation. Now, this is pretty cool. You can set your local elevation and the Aiden will adjust the max temperature of water to match whatever the boil point is at your elevation. A cool little Easter egg is if you go into edit profiles and then go to medium roast and scroll down to the name and you just click the name a bunch of times, it'll pull up this cute little game that you can play. That's kind of like a bit of a Fellow product signature. They do that on a lot of their products, pretty cool. A couple issues though with the screen and kind of the interface overall. Obviously, they have crammed a lot of functionality into that tiny little area and this single control point right here. I mean, we haven't even gotten into programming a profile yet, which you can do on there. Compared to some of their other products, the experience of using that screen feels a little half-baked. You know, they have the EKG Pro Studio Stag Kettle, that's got a round screen, and like as you're navigating that thing, like every aspect of that just feels so native to that round format. And when you're using the Aiden, it just doesn't really feel like that. It feels like they took a square display and put this little circular window over it. The ready screen, you know, is nice and round and colorful, and there's a couple little menus where you're like, oh, it does like a round thing. That seems intentional. It's intuitive enough to use, but it just feels like as an experience, it's lacking a little. A good example is this clock here, right? Actually, it shows you the time and it'll give you a little AM or PM underneath it. And all of that text, including the AM or PM, is centered, which has the effect of when you're looking at the Aiden from a fair distance away across the room or whatever, it looks like the time is like off center. It's a small thing, but it just is like just a little triggering for me, which leads me probably to my most petty gripe about the Aiden. The Stag Pro Studio Kettle has this really sharp looking analog clock. So when it's in standby mode, it just will show you this nice looking little clock face on there. I don't get how there is no option to do that on this nice round screen. I mean, they went to the lengths to program a full like Space Invaders game to put in here, like sound effects included, but I don't have an analog clock. The clock that is on here is not even centered. It just seems like it doesn't have the polish that it should. Moving on. Before we talk about brew performance, which is fantastic, and tests, let's talk about this app. Creating profiles, that is a good user experience. It's intuitive, nothing confusing about it. The way it works when you create a profile is it bases it all around the ratio that you want, and then you set the number of pulses, the time between pulses, and the temperature of the pulses for both single serve and batch. You can set it kind of different for each one of those within a given profile. Now, if you're just getting into this and you're just trying to figure out how to start messing around with this stuff, a ratio of 1:16, dry coffee to water is a good place to start. You can do up to 10 pulses for both batch and single serve, as well as a bloom phase. And you have the ability to adjust the temperature of all that stuff in 0.5 degree Celsius increments from boiling, wherever that lands based on your elevation, all the way down to 50 degrees Celsius. Lower than that, it'll just kind of shift to off and do room temperature. You can also do cold brew profiles, which this is really cool. It will drip room temperature water in there over like 1 to 3 hours for that cold brew slow drip vibe. Very cool. My favorite feature on the app, you can name your profiles with a regular keyboard on your phone. Unfortunately, that's about all you can do on the app. No access to the scheduler, no way to trigger a brew, no way to adjust any of the other settings. That's it. Now, apparently Fellow is going to be releasing that stuff eventually. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it would be really nice to see that app have full functionality. As far as brew quality and coffee quality goes though, like, you know, I would do side by side. I'm brewing a V60 and I have the Aiden set up to brew exactly the same. Sometimes, honestly, I would pick the Aiden brews over my own. And not only that, it will brew totally consistently. You know, you have the same recipe, use the same coffee, same grinder. It's going to come out exactly the same. No messing up your pour. It's just consistently really good. That is so good. Now, as far as dialing in your single serve pour overs, I have some tips for you here. Number one, I really like the combination of the basket they used and the way that those 3 center jets kind of keep things agitated. They have the flow rate, the in and out, all set up for really forgiving brew parameters. I did find that with the way those 3 jets will agitate the bed of coffee in there. The brews are a little bit better when you can maintain like a little bit of a head of water on top of the coffee bed. It just seems like it all like agitates and evens out in there a little bit better than if you set it up to kind of drain fully between pulses. What you want to look for is you want to look for like a slow, steady stream of water coming out here. You don't want to really see it starting and stopping. And you also want to watch when you're creating your profile that your total brew time isn't going a lot longer than you think it should. If you can get both of those things, odds are that you're going to get a really good cup of coffee. And if you want to double check, you just peek inside when you're done and you should get a nicely sloped bed of coffee in here, but without any huge like deep divots into the bed. As far as getting high extraction, absolutely no issue. I was getting really good extractions out of this thing, sometimes even more than I would get out of my side-by-side V60 brew. On batch brew, very similar story. Just very easy, good, consistent coffee. I found if anything, the batch brews were a little bit more forgiving because of the way it just kind of rains down a little more softly and evenly on that bed of coffee. Really good flavor, balanced, consistent, excellent. And a big reason for that is actually the performance of this machine. So let's talk about some performance tests. Flow rate on here is fixed and Fellow doesn't tell you what it is. Now in my testing, I tested the flow rate on batch at about 3.7 milliliters per second and the flow rate on single serve at 3.5 milliliters per second. I think it probably is actually the same amount of water that's pumping through there, and any difference is just related to back pressure. On single serve, it only comes out of those 3 center jets, whereas batch brew, it comes out of all 15 jets a little bit more gently, kind of like rain down on your brew. And that change in back pressure means that on single serve, those 3 jets are going to be pushing water out a lot faster, kind of mixing and agitating a lot more aggressively than it does on batch, where it's kind of more gently raining down on your batch brew. Temperature stability. Now, this is where I was like extremely impressed with this machine. Like I was doing my tests and I was like kind of shocked. You know, Fellow says they can do instantaneous temperature corrections, and that is a pretty bold claim, and they are pretty nearly right on when they say that. You know, I do temperature stability tests on a lot of stuff, so, you know, I put like a probe right up in there and I checked on my thermometer versus what it was saying on the screen. And I was finding, you know, typically it was within like a degree or very often less than a degree from the temperature that it was displaying on the screen. And that's better than a lot of espresso machines that I test. First of all, this brew chamber up here is kind of sealed with this little rubber gasket that goes around the outside of the shower head. Now, that prevents steam from coming out and under your cabinets and all that, but it also makes for a very temperature stable brewing environment inside here. In addition to that, they use this kind of ingeniously designed heater that has a very low thermal mass and can shift temperature change very quickly. So as water is going through there, it kind of just flips and all of a sudden it's a different temperature. It can heat up by heating up or cool down by just letting the cold water that's coming in cool the element down. I did tests on both inclining and declining pulse temperatures, and I found on declining temperatures, it was actually crazy accurate, you know, within like half a degree. Now, inclining temperatures, for whatever reason, I don't think you would tend to brew that way very much of the time anyways, but I found it was slightly less accurate, still typically within a degree and a half. And I don't know exactly how that's working, but it's pretty interesting when you watch it. You know, when it changes temperature, you can see the temperature reading like drop just a little bit, almost like it's flipping itself off to kind of recalibrate itself. And then it will come back up to the temperature and just kind of stick right on the temperature that it's supposed to be on. Really impressive. However they did that, it is one of the craziest things I have seen in coffee tech in a while. Now, as far as volume, this was really interesting. I don't know why this was, but I was finding no matter what my temperature or volume was set to, it would undershoot volume by like 5 to 5.5%. I don't know why that was. It didn't really have any impact on the flavor, that's for sure. and it's just something to be mindful of. If you're like into really fine tuning your brews, you can adjust that by tweaking your ratio, or Fellow may update that at some point in the future. Not totally sure. Couple other little things that I like: when you pull the single serve basket out of the machine, it closes off on the bottom so it doesn't drip when you're taking it to the compost. Kind of nice. And the large batch carafe, it just pours really nicely too. Two nice little pluses there. So we have unreal cups of coffee, and to be honest, pretty staggering performance in a lot of ways. What is not to love about this coffee maker? There is definitely some stuff, and build quality for me is probably top of the list. This thing is super plasticky, and not just plasticky, like it's very cheap feeling. Like the whole thing will flex, the panels feel and sound cheap when you're dropping them. They've done some kind of interesting things on the hinges, but it just feels really cheaply made. And unfortunately, you know, I know some people personally who have had build quality issues almost right out of the box with the Aiden. You know, somebody lost a magnet on their batch brew basket, so the batch brew function didn't work at all. I saw somebody else broke the handle off their carafe. Now, fortunately, in all those cases, Fellow customer support came through fully and quickly, so that's good. Would I like to see a higher quality fit and finish that is a little bit more in line with the rest of Fellow stuff? Yes. Would that also raise the price? Yes. I know a lot of these decisions have probably been made to get the price as low as possible, which is fantastic, but it just doesn't have that premium feel. The screen and the user interface, you know, would love to see some improvements there, like a round clock at the very least, and increased functionality on the app. Whenever that comes along, I will be eagerly awaiting it. Now, one thing that actually is a bit of a limitation of the hardware is there is a sensor on the bottom of this reservoir that will tell you when it's empty, but it doesn't tell you how much water is actually in here. And combined with the fact that you really can't see the water level at all from the front of the machine means that you can sometimes run out of water mid-brew with no warning. Now, there isn't really any way to change that. It just is a bit of a negative that you have to be aware of. Also, when you do open this lid after you brew, you know, because this is all sealed and there's some water hanging out inside the shower head, water will kind of come out and splash down onto the top of your brew. That water can drip down under here and you end up with a little bit of a mess. So cup quality, really good. Performance, again, really good. Digital experience and build quality, they are lacking a little bit. Overall, definitely some compromises, and I can see how they were made in some cases to get the price under a certain point. Still, for 365 bucks to have a coffee maker that will do a killer batch brew, as well as pour over that is just as good, sometimes honestly even better than I can make myself, there is just not anything else out there that can do what this can do at this price. So who should buy this? I think if you only want to do batch brews, like big honkin' pots of coffee, this machine could be a little bit more horsepower than you need. So unless you just love the looks, there are probably coffee makers out there that can do a comparable job, maybe even at a bit better build quality. If you want a Swiss Army knife though, that can do batch brew just as easily as pour over, and it has like a full nerd out mode for you to go totally crazy to tune your brew exactly the way you want, but it also has to be equally usable for the non-coffee crazy people in your family. I just can't think of anything else that will perform at this level. Personally, I'm really excited for this. I think it's a great thing for coffee to see products like this coming out. I'm excited to see what Fellow does with this line over time. And in the meantime, I am very happily enjoying the cups of coffee with it. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel if this video was at all helpful for you. And I want to hear from you. What do you think of the Fellow Aiden? How do you weigh those pros and cons? Or maybe you would look at something else entirely. I would love to hear your thoughts down there in the comments, and especially if you've picked up one of these, that's something that's always really helpful for people to hear from existing owners. Drop your thoughts down there in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is as good as this one is, and we'll see you next time.